You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Capitol protest sparked demonstrations outside statehouses across the United States. We are also going to talk about, obviously, what happened in the Capitol yesterday. Today is Thursday, and on Wednesday, we had the breach of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. by Trump supporters. All right, that's what we're going to talk about. I'm probably only going to do this one podcast on this topic because it's like, everybody else beats this topic to death because it was a super hot news item. I cover other stuff too. I try not to cover as much of the big political stuff because everybody else does such a great job. Nobody wants to hear me. But you guys do, so I'm going to talk about it. Let's get into it. If you're new here, my name's Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, and I read the news. All right. Capitol protests sparked demonstrations outside statehouses across the U.S. While most demonstrations were peaceful, violence broke out in some states. As pro-Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, others supporting the president gathered in state capitals nationwide to oppose President-elect Joe Biden's win, leading to the evacuations of some statehouses and lawmakers. Violence erupted in Washington, D.C. as Congress tried to affirm Biden's Electoral College victory. That should have been just all right, get this done, a procedure. That was an electoral procedure, right? Instead, we had all these we had this, about 100,000 people, was it? We're not really sure. It's thousands and thousands of peaceful. No, it really wasn't peaceful, but some of it was. I've researched the news and I've listened to a kind of a wide variety of what's going on. And what I find interesting is that the media narrative on this one, all of a sudden, when you protest and you do some stuff that's been happening all summer long, like Portland had protests like this, not even like this, where you've got people who are where they shouldn't be. They're basically breaking into state capitol. The nation's capital, not even the state capital, the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. They're having confrontations with police. All of a sudden, it's violent. Every single news story indicates this as violent, violence. But the deal is they didn't graffiti everything up. They didn't go rampage a bunch of stores. They didn't destroy people's livelihoods, which are small business. They didn't go after Starbucks. They didn't do any of that nonsense. They went right to the Capitol, very focused protest. And a lot of them were just carrying flags and doing their thing, chanting USA, USA. Do I think that was a great idea? I think just like I've talked about the whole Black Lives Matter protest, they always start off doing their thing. It is peaceful for maybe a little bit. But what happened yesterday at the Capitol, I can't really condone that. I just can't. You can't break into a Capitol building and just kind of expect to do your thing, because it's the same thing with the Black Lives Matter protesters. And Antifa. What are you going to do once you take over a federal building? What are you going to do there? People were talking about, it's going to be a coup. There's going to be all this kind of crazy stuff. And a lot of this to me is just like, you know what? Peaceful protesting, standing on the public sidewalk of a public street, that's one thing. Breaking through fences, breaking into federal buildings, doing that kind of stuff, I'm not really down with. And, 4 people lost their lives. One gal was a 14-year veteran of the military, the Air Force. She got killed trying to go through a window, trying to breach a door. 3 other people died because of medical emergencies. I mean, I understand there was a ton of people there, and that's not that many people, but 4 people died. I'm not okay with that. The message that this sends, I don't know. I'm okay with the whole peaceful protest, but so often it devolves into something else. And you're like, all right, you're making your point, but here's what everybody else is taking away from this. And it's this message of just complete bedlam. And I know a lot of people are going to say, but they were just peacefully protesting. Yeah, but they're breaking into a building, got some windows smashed up. It was way more peaceful than most of the Black Lives Matter stuff that we've seen all summer, that we've seen since the whole George Floyd thing. Way more peaceful than that. But people want to showcase this, since these are Trump supporters, as just, the far right is violent, just a violent overthrow of the nation's capital. It really wasn't like that, was it? But if you want to have that perspective, you certainly can. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. It's like I don't really agree with any of these protests that end in any of this kind of stuff because it just sends the wrong message. This morning when I was doing my cardio session, I was listening to audio that was taken at the nation's capital, and the same unhinged type talk and shouting and yelling. I mean, even though it was far right supporters, it could have been the far left. For all you know, you just insert a few different words, just that kind of talk where it's just people shouting really loud and yelling and just trying to make their point. And your takeaway from it is these people are unhinged. And there's probably vast majority of the people that were doing their protest, they didn't think they were actually going to try and get in to the Capitol. They were there just to do a protest. And that's the way I think a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff started off. People are just out there doing their normal protest. You stay on a public street, public sidewalk, do that kind of thing. But you don't try and break into buildings. I'm a no-go on that part. And then at some point in time, the politicians were handed out gas masks because they're literally using tear gas to try and get some of these people out of there. That's just a scene of chaos. And I'm a no-go. I'm just like, I'm trying to be a reasonable person. And I'm like, okay, you are convinced that the election process has been rigged. You are convinced that you've been duped. I understand that is your conviction. But from my end of things, what I see is that there hasn't been much in the way of evidence to support the whole idea, the whole ideology that the election has basically been bogus. I'm not seeing it, not seeing that. It's kind of like I did a podcast on the whole UFO thing not long ago. And I'm like, I want to believe that UFOs are out there. But until I see some hard evidence, I don't know. I'm not convinced here. I always bill myself as a reasonable guy, and I kind of think that's where I'm at right now is like, you know what? And one of the big things is I think what has happened is that any group now looks at what happened with the Black Lives Matter and all those protests and looks at them and, well, those guys did it all summer. They did it all summer. They did it into the fall. Why can't we have just one protest? Why can't we just do one? So I think with the Democrats basically turning a blind eye to everything that's happened, the $2 billion worth of damage across the United States to small business and big business, I think people are looking at that going, but if they can do that, we can have one. Granted, it's the nation's capital, but, we're making a statement here. So a lot of this stuff, I don't know. We need to move past this. And this isn't really the way that you kind of get you don't get your way doing this. It is basically the mob rules. Again, the mob is getting past 4 layers of security at the nation's capital. No, I'm not okay with that. That is not a message that I want to see put out there. If you think the elections are rigged, let's point at exactly what it is that is wrong there, and let's work on that. But peaceful protest on the sidewalk, all right, I'm okay with that. And I've been okay with that with the Black Lives Matter thing. But we got a different thing going here. And I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of my viewers and my listeners on the podcast are probably in the same boat that peaceful protesting, 2 thumbs up, no problem. But what this is devolving into is basically just the mob rules. And I'm a hard no-go on that. Just a hard no-go. And what's been interesting is just kind of following the comparisons of how the media billed what happened all summer. Oh, it was peaceful protests. And all of a sudden, they do the exact same thing at the nation's capital. And, it's violent. It's horrible and violent. Oh, the violence is shocking. This is insurrection. We need to engage the Insurrection Act. I mean, we need people. We need heads to roll right now. What happens to security? And the funny thing is at the end yesterday of the news cycle, they were congratulating the police. All of a sudden, DC police are doing a really good job. They've done a really good job for us. All of a sudden, the police have gone from being vilified to, hey, thanks for being there, guys. That was some stellar work you did. So do we want to defund you? Or in our time of need, we pick up the phone and call 911 and, we need the police to be here. But when it's politically awkward to do that, defund the police. Which one are you doing? And the police are the one that shot that gal who was a veteran. And so not much has been said about that, right? I mean, not much said there. You know why? Because it's a Trump supporter. She was an ardent Trump supporter. And the media is basically, one less Trump supporter. I think it's horrible that somebody got killed. But again, and I've said the exact same thing in the whole Black Lives Matter. If you are in a place that you shouldn't be, if you are trying to climb through a doorway that has been secured, that is barricaded off, and somebody shoots and kills you, you are not in a place you should have been. I don't think you blame the cops there. I think you take responsibility for your actions and go, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have been here. And I think it's super unfortunate that gal got killed. What was her name? I can't remember. Babbitt, I think was her last name. I'll try and remember her first name through this. Babbitt, Alicia Babbitt, I think it was. But same thing. If somebody gets killed in a protest, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever else, they get killed in a pro-Trump protest. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can go down. People knew that going into yesterday's protest, and yet they did it anyway. They took that risk. And that's where I'm kind of like, I'd be one of those 95,000 people outside on the sidewalk going, God, that looks like a mess going on in there. I'm not going any closer. I'm not going to get any closer to that. I don't need to overthrow. I don't need to be part of this attempted coup or whatever the media is calling it. But then again, that's just me. I'd kind of sit back and go, well, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I'm seeing this, seeing what's going on firsthand. But that's scary. I mean, that's some scary stuff. I don't know. That's kind of my take on that whole thing. So violence erupted in Washington, D.C. as Congress tried to affirm Biden's Electoral College victory. A mob breached the U.S. Capitol, resulting in 4 deaths and at least 70 arrests. Now, most of the arrests, they were for, they had violated a curfew. You are here and you can't be here, therefore we're arresting you, we're getting them out of there. What you didn't see yesterday is you didn't see cop cars being burned. Didn't see that. You didn't see the whole anti-cop thing. You saw the protesters getting into it with the cops because they were trying to get past the cops to someplace they shouldn't have been. That was the engagement they had. The chants were USA, USA, not all cops are bastards. So on that level, the protests that happened yesterday, I'm more in line with the USA, USA than I am all the other stuff that I saw all summer. I'm just more okay with that. But breaching the nation's capital, no, not so much. That's not really where I want to be. And I can't really support that. But I understand that group feels like they have been screwed and they are making their feelings known to the world. Could it have been handled differently? Yeah. But again, we all kind of expected this to go somewhat the way it went down, right? Maybe not as extreme as it did, but because there was actually gunfire inside of the Capitol. I mean, when does that happen? Never. Wild stuff. The chaos in the nation's capital came as hundreds of people gathered in state capitals from Georgia to New Mexico, with many carrying flags and waving signs that read, "Stop the Steal" and 4 more years. Some carried guns in places like Oklahoma, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and Washington State. We're right in the heat of things there. We're just going. All right. And the main picture in this article is supporters of President Trump, including those with guns and a bat, stand outside the governor's mansion after breaching a perimeter fence Wednesday, January 6, 2021, at the Capitol in Olympia, Washington. Go Olympia. All right. Governor Inslee, they're looking for you. Where were you? They were just going to ask you a few questions and maybe have a cup of tea while they chanted USA, USA. I'm joking. That's not what they were there for. Who knows what they're there for? But these guys are armed. They have definitely, what are those? Is that I don't know my semi-automatic weapons, but these guys have them. And oh yeah, one guy with a bat. Very nice. Is that a Louisville Slugger? I'm not sure. If I got closer, I could probably see. So in Washington State, dozens of protesters, some of them whom were armed, broke through a gate at Washington Governor's Mansion in Olympia and gathered on the lawn for about 30 minutes before being cleared from the area. You guys got to go. You got to leave. And I'm covering this story because my 25-year-old son called me up and he said, hey, did you see that they broke into Inslee's house? I'm like, did they break into his house or just go on his lawn? I'm like, they went on his lawn. So we talked about that for a little bit. But if my kid sees that and lets me know, hey, that is a news story of interest to him, that's why I'm sharing it with you here. My kids don't listen to my podcast. My oldest one does. My youngest one doesn't, mainly because he says, Dad, I don't listen to your podcast because it's just your opinion. That's all right. I'm okay with that. I mean, that's a pretty good reason, right? But we do talk about content, and that's why we're talking this one. So a tweet from Shauna Sellersby. Good afternoon from the Washington State Capitol building in Olympia, where hundreds have gathered for Operation Occupy the Capitol. They're flying flags. They are not burning the flags. Big difference. Huge difference. Huge difference. And from that standpoint, I'm kind of like, okay, if I had to choose one over the other, you kind of know where I stand. Because the whole ACAB thing, yeah, not a fan. Protesters are now standing outside of Governor Jay Inslee's tweet from the same gal, Shauna Sellersby. Protesters are now standing outside of Governor Jay Inslee's mansion on the Capitol campus chanting, "Open the gates." Some are banging their flags on the metal gates. No word if Inslee is currently here or not. Hashtag Olympia protest. He was not there. He was somewhere else, safe and sound. The Washington State Patrol tweeted that Governor Jay Inslee and his family are in a safe location without elaborating. I can't remember which Republican it was, but Antifa basically just went to his house and he wasn't there. He was on a trip somewhere. His wife and baby, less than a year-old baby and wife were there. Antifa went up, banged on his door, and crazy stuff. So these politicians, they're getting some action, and it's not a great kind of action to be getting. You know what I mean? This stuff is these people are unhinged. You go to somebody's house, I'm a no-go. If you stand out in the street again, yep, all right. Don't do any graffiti. Don't do anything stupid. Don't break stuff. But invariably that happens, right? Graffiti, no-go for the pro-Trump supporters. They don't really do. They just don't like carrying around spray cans, right? It stinks, makes you high, that whole thing. They are more of we're going to get into a fight kind of thing, and then we're going to go drinking afterwards. That's kind of where they're at. The Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer. These guys are all big. I saw a story where the Proud Boys were going to try and infiltrate as Antifa, and I'm like, well, that's never going to work because those guys are all big, and Antifa is small. They don't eat. So you see a big guy coming through? Yep, that is a Proud Boy who is costuming up like Antifa. You can kind of read that right there. I was reading a story from Andy Ngo. He is the Vietnamese journalist that took a real beat down in Portland from Antifa. And he was commenting, I think he was in England. He's on a trip in England right now. And he was commenting, yeah, somebody said that that's Antifa in there breaking into the state or the nation's capital. It's not Antifa. Those are pro-Trump supporters. He was basically like, just look at how they're acting. Look at their size. That's essentially what he was saying. Is like, yeah, no, those are not the black bloc crowd that we are used to seeing at the protests. Crowd carried signs saying, "Stop the steal" and "Trump won 2020." They were heard repeating allegations of election fraud. It's what this is all over, isn't it? Election fraud. And yet I haven't seen any hard evidence. If there's some hard evidence out there, enough evidence that I could go, all right, you extrapolate that out, you could probably make an argument for that. But from what I've seen, I can't get behind that argument. It's not there. Protesters had earlier gathered outside the state capitol to demand a recount of the U.S. presidential election and the state's gubernatorial election. Inslee, a Democrat, won by more than 500,000 votes. Wow, Washington State it's so blue it hurts, right? I mean, let's just admit it. We haven't had a Republican governor here since like 1980. I mean, that's a long time. I don't have to tell you. 40 years, 41 years, most of my life has been, with the Democratic governor. It's just how we do it here in Washington. Very liberal. A patrol spokesman said no arrests were made in that whole deal. So for the most part, that's peaceful, right? I mean, if you have no arrests made, all right. Some people came, they did some chanting, they banged maybe their flags on their poles on the governor's, the fence outside of the government. All right, let's see what happened in Utah. As several hundred protesters gathered outside the state capitol building in Salt Lake City, Governor Spencer Cox and Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson sent staff home as a precautionary measure. Some of the protesters were armed, and many did not wear masks. Oh no, or follow social distance. They didn't say stay socially distanced. Heavens, we can't have that. The demonstrations remained mostly peaceful. However, Salt Lake Tribune photographer Rick Egan said he was pepper sprayed by a demonstrator who taunted him for wearing a mask and shoved him as he was shooting video of the protest. It wasn't immediately clear if anyone was arrested, meaning they probably weren't. So you see the thread of story kind of going on here? These people are protesting, but they're not burning up cars. They're not tussling with the police. They're not graffitiing stuff up. Otherwise, there'd be arrests for graffiti. They're not doing this just ridiculous stuff that we've seen all summer. And yet, the media, the violence is outrageous. Outrageous. So the media spin. That to me is like, this is really interesting. Even an email I got from whatever, I don't know, person it is within our government here. She sends out emails on all the stuff that Inslee's going to be talking about. Got one of her emails, and it was like, she literally came right out and said the peaceful Black Lives Matter protests. And I was like, what? Peaceful. So peaceful, they caused $2 billion of damage to businesses across the U.S. What media were you listening to? Clearly not the same one as I saw when I was in Portland and at CHOP, because that wasn't quite so peaceful the way that whole thing went down, right? And Portland, night after night after night of hammering on federal buildings, and everybody's like, nothing to see here. We're all good. We're all good. Peaceful protesting going on. Yep, we're all good. And then the turn happens, and oh my gosh, thank God the police are here. You guys are doing a bang-up job. Let's see what happened in Oklahoma. Hundreds of pro-Trump supporters crowded on the steps of the state capitol in Oklahoma City, waving flags and signs saying, "Stop the steal," to protest the certification of vote of Biden. These demonstrations did not turn violent and ended early due to light rain. Oh, no. Did you bring an umbrella? No, we're in Oklahoma City. Oh, I didn't bring an umbrella. We got to go. Let's go home and watch the news. Let's see what happened in D.C. You think that's what they're probably doing? Probably. It's like, nothing to see here. Let's go home. We did our thing. In New Mexico, the arrival of a caravan of hundreds of flag-waving Trump supporters in vehicles and on horseback prompted the New Mexico police to evacuate staff from a state house building as a precautionary measure as chaos and violence broke out in Washington, D.C. Demonstrators sang "God Bless America," honked horns, and wrongly announced on a megaphone that Trump was the rightful election winner. I love that they say, this is even Fox, they said, and wrongly announced on a megaphone that Trump was the rightful election winner. Like, really? You got to throw in the word wrongly there? We got to point out, we can't have this be known that they were just announcing on a megaphone that Trump was the rightful election winner, because that's what they said. When in reality, that's what they said. Though Biden won the vote in New Mexico by a margin of roughly 11%. All right, okay. We get it. We think that, Trump probably lost. And I think most of my viewers, do you guys think Trump probably lost fair and square? It was close. It was close. Was it close enough where we can say, I don't know, we need a full recount of everything? My instinct is to say, I haven't really seen anything. I wish there was, because I'd like to see a different outcome here, if you know what I mean. But the harsh reality is, I think it is what it is, and we got to move on. And this stuff going on right now, I don't think this really solves anything. But we're also at a stage where I don't think you're going to change anybody's mind about anything. People are going to do what they're going to want to do. If you believe that Trump was robbed, you're probably going to continue believing that no matter what I say. But odds are, if you've gotten this far in the podcast, you probably think the same thing I do, which is, well, it's unfortunate that that's the way it went, but it happened that way. Now we got to deal with it. And this other stuff going on, this is a sideshow we don't necessarily need. As a 52-year-old middle-aged man in America, I'm kind of embarrassed that this is the stuff going on. It's like, really? Really? Okay. Extremists just running around doing, okay, let's go. Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, I butchered his name, I'm not going to repeat it, probably never get that name, and his staff evacuated their offices at the Capitol as about 100 protesters gathered outside, some armed with long guns. Uh-oh. They got a long gun. They're going to shoot you from a long range, just a rifle, right? So they had that going on. Trump has spoken out against Raffensperger over the state's vote count, which he lost to Biden by about 12,000 votes. Granted, that is pretty darn close, right? Pretty darn close. But how many recounts are we doing? How many lawsuits are we going through? If any of these had some merit, I would say, okay, let's check it out. But each one, when they come back, and I'm like, yeah, there just wasn't any. Another judge. Could you say all the judges have this all rigged? I mean, maybe, but that's a stretch too, right? I mean, this just doesn't, for me, I'm kind of like, let's move on with our lives. Let's get this going. Because I can't do much about this. I know you guys can't do much about it either. Kind of time to get the show on the road and let's get going and live our lives normally. Colorado. In Colorado, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock ordered city agencies to close buildings after hundreds gathered in front of the Capitol building for a protest against the election results. Oregon. Protesters scuffled with counter-protesters at the Oregon's Capitol in Salem as riot police moved in. Protesters clashed with counter-protesters at the Capitol on Wednesday, yesterday in Salem, Oregon. Not surprising there, right? I mean, Antifa doesn't take the day off. They are going to counter-protest. They're going to be all clad in black, and they're just going to be going hard because that's what they do. They don't really have a lot else to do. At least one person was arrested on suspicion of harassment. We suspect you have been harassing somebody. And disorderly conduct as police in riot gear tried to get people, many of them armed, to leave. The area was largely cleared by mid-afternoon. So yeah, surprising that there wasn't more chaos that went on. I mean, I'm sure it was very scary for people in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. to have that go on. But relative to what I experienced this summer, that was pretty calm. That was pretty normal. Yeah, your structure kind of got broken into, but, you know, what happened with the federal buildings in Portland over the summer was this happened every single day, every single night for like 150 days. Businesses were broken into just non-stop. Here in Seattle, same thing. We had the whole CHOP thing. Then we've had these protests that they go on these marches and they break into businesses and they do all that. I mean, that's a lot more violent than what we saw yesterday, for sure. For sure. I mean, just no doubt about it. So I think you got to kind of look at this thing and go, all right, we need to move on. It's time to get this show on the road. Let's go. But I know President Trump has indicated he's going to go quietly. We'll see how that goes. Will his supporters do that? I don't know. So yeah, all the major social media is kind of like, all right, we're done with the president. We really don't like what he's saying. We're just going to deplatform him and we're going to move on. So will there be a lawsuit over that? Probably. I don't know. We just got to move on. That's my whole thing is, okay, yep. We've heard all of the protests from both sides, and now life needs to move on. We're still dealing with this whole pandemic thing, businesses being shut down. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to kind of consider. And I don't know. I'm ready to call this stuff kind of good. Maybe you're not. Maybe you are, flag holding, USA, USA. I don't know. Maybe you're all cops are bastards. No, you're not. Especially not this late in the video, because you would have heard all my other opinions and you would have been, this guy's an idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about. Maybe I don't. I don't know. But if you're here now, you probably think, this guy's got a 50-50 chance on getting something right, at least in this one podcast. So as this stuff keeps coming out, I will cover it. I don't like covering the big national stuff like this because I feel like it gets beaten to death. And that's why I kind of picked a storyline that was a little bit different, talking about what happened at the individual state capitals, because I think that's interesting as well. Because everybody yesterday was glued to the national media. What's going on? What's happening? It's crazy. This is wild. The violence. The violence was overwhelming. All right. I will keep covering this stuff. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Stay safe out there. I will catch up with you guys soon. Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.